I've been at this for a number of years, and I still have an incredibly long ways to go. I still feel most comfortable on my own turf, on my home court, when I have the advantage. In the work that I do, which not all of it is cross-cultural, but a good portion of it is. For me, as the white guy, as the educated guy, as the wealthy guy, as the guy who holds a lot of power, a guy who has a lot of authority, simply because I work for the denomination, I have to be very deliberate about going into those situations and giving power away, doing my best to make the leaders of this congregation feel like they know stuff that I don't know, that they have things to teach me. One of the things that I get to do is when working with poorer congregations, there is this sense that okay, MCEC with their $1 million+ budget, you've got money. Yeah, it's all spent, and it's all, and we don't have anything to spare. But they look at the $1 million budget and say, well, you've got money. And for me to help them understand, okay, what are you bringing to MCEC? So for the 3 congregations that were introduced recently in Leamington as new member congregations in MCEC, I've had the conversation, and I will need to continue to have the conversation with them. What gifts are you bringing? What do you have to, not learn, but what do you have to give? What do you have to teach us? One more little exercise here, and then we'll take that break. There is a professor from Australia, a theologian, a missiologist, a church planter. His name is Michael Frost, and all of this comes from him. This is not mine, but I'm certainly very willing to borrow it. His notion of missional church. He says, okay, here are the 4 pillars of what church is. So you've got worship, you've got mission, you've got Christian education, and you've got community. And he says, for the last number of centuries, well, I'll just stop right there. In your own church experience, and I recognize we have some staff here who are not working as administrators in church, but hopefully you still go to church. That's okay. I'm working with that assumption. When you look at your congregation that you attend right now, which of these 4 quadrants do you think is the most important? In other words, where's the most time go? Because in a Canadian context, in the North American middle class culture, time is one of the most important resources we've got. So for your congregation, which of these 4?
Community for us.
Community is for you? Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm going to give you the right answer after everybody responds.
You have to pick one.
Yeah, because my hunch is one of these is more important than all the other 3. You're not convinced. So okay. I'll pick as many as you like. Any number under 5. Which one? All 4. Okay.
Worship.
Okay, worship too.
3. Worship as well.
Okay.
Worship and Christian ed.
Worship and Christian ed? I'll take a couple more. Not everybody has to respond.
All 4.
All 4?
Worship edition.
One more.
Community.
Okay. Michael Frost, and I agree with Michael Frost, says, for the last several centuries, this is key for all congregations. Let me explain to you why he says that's key. He said, yes, we have mission, we have community, and we have Christian ed. But for most congregations, the bulk of their community is happening when? The Sunday worship. Okay? If you take worship, if you were to take worship out of Jane Finch, you'd have less and less. The pastor would continue to focus here. But as far as the folks of the Jane Finch neighborhood, if you took worship out, it'd be more and more challenging to have any sense of Christian community. That's my hunch. Mission. If you don't have worship, it's going to be difficult for people to be mobilized around mission. And all of these things are important. They all exist in your churches. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying that that is the lens through which all of these others get interpreted. All right? Now, Missional Church, Missio Dei, begins to turn this thing on its head, where Missional Church says, no, this needs to be the lens. So one of the examples that, Australian example that Michael Frost uses is on Sundays, everybody in Australia is at the beach. Now, obviously, that's an overstatement, but he said that's where people are. And it was a Canadian audience, and he says, I understand hockey's important to you as a culture. We don't have hockey in Australia, but what's important to us, all of our children learn to swim. And they all, there are programs, there are teams. It impacts all of Australian culture and society. And so he says, where are people on Sunday? Well, they're not in worship in a local congregation. They're at the beach. And what the church in Australia tends to do, this would never happen in Canada, by the way, I'm sure no one would ever say this in any of your congregations. We lament, we are saddened, we are grieved that people aren't in church on a Sunday morning. If we could just have a little revival in Canada, if we could just get those young families, the age of my kids, back into church where they belong. See, that's the old model. Missional Church, Missio Dei, says, we go to their turf. We leave our home court and we go to their turf. So what Michael Frost and his church have begun to do is, guess where they have worship on Sundays? At the beach. Anybody here have church at the hockey arena on Sunday morning?
I was at a hockey tournament, and we had church around the pool on a Sunday morning.
Good for you.
That was one of those moments I won't ever forget. It just took a couple people to start talking, and then there was a whole crowd of us.
That's an example of missional church. Any questions, comments before you go on a well-deserved break? All right, welcome back. If you would find the qualities of a Missio Dei leader, which should be somewhere in your packet this morning. I'm going to have you go through this as individuals, and it is not all, but a number of administrators I have worked with over the years were always uncomfortable with the term leader. No, that's not who I am. I'm not a leader. What I'm proposing to you this morning is that as administrators, you have influence. And if you have influence, you have the ability and the opportunity to lead. So that's just, if you may disagree with that, but I'm giving you this, and I want you to just walk through this on your own. And under each of the 9, just pick one of the pearls that are there. Say, okay, here's something that I want to work at over the next period of time. And I don't care if the next period of time is this week, this month, or this year. But just, it will help you to, I think, begin to recognize that if we're going to be a missional church, someone has to be leading the way. And I'm not suggesting that administrators need to lead the way on their own. But you're all part of some kind of pastoral staff, pastoral team. And the more and better understanding that you can have about yourself as a leader within the Missio Dei paradigm, I think the more your church is going to be able to accomplish. So I'm just going to be quiet and let you go to work here. What I'd like you to do next at your table is to share with your colleagues of those 9 qualities in your job, which of these qualities are the most important? You don't have to limit it to 1, but it does have to be less than 8. In other words, don't say, oh, all of them are. What are the qualities that jumped out the most at your table?
As being a challenge or?
Thank you. Let me be more clear. No, those things that your table are saying, here are the things that I need for my job. So it may be a challenge, it may be something, no, I'm actually pretty good at this, but if you're really Mennonite, you'll never tell me you're really good at this. I know that about you. So what are the things that your table thinks are the most important?
Something that has come out in our conversation is that we are connectors.
Okay.
We are sort of the hub, and we recognize that this mailbox hasn't been emptied in 6 months, so therefore you need to know about it so you can follow up. So that we're connectors in ministry.
Good. I saw a lot of, when you soon said connectors at other tables, you're going, oh yeah.
I think one thing that's not at our table is humility.
Okay.
Grace comes in sometimes the most unexpected ways in our job, but then also sometimes, or I personally, I shouldn't speak for the others, would like to say, where is the grace in this situation? We're the church, it should be happening as a job.
Yeah.
So it's a tension between the grace that comes from down, where it's unexpected, which is amazing, and it does happen that way.
That's a little small miracle in and of itself.
It is, it's wonderful. But then there's other times that we go, you know what, we're all the church here, we should be able to do this better.
Yeah.
So that can also be humbling.
Yeah. I get that. That makes sense. Any others that jumped out at your tables? We don't have to dwell on this very long.
We talked about perspective, right? Understanding the organization that we're working for, and the vision and the task, and our place in it. Someone mentioned that understanding the why then helps her know how to do the task.
Yeah. That makes sense.
I think going along with the connected aspect of being a catalyst, of taking ideas and bringing them into action, being the person who holds the resources, be it the conference or the media or outside agencies that can be brought to bear on to actually develop the ideas.
Yeah. I suspect that for most administrators here, there's more resources crossing your desk or monitor than anyone else in the church.
Understanding that the path to the Missional Church is messy, mysterious, and open-ended.
Amen.
We like things that are organized and TikTok and on time and, you know.
Because that, again, I don't have actual data for this, but my hunch would be that for most administrators, that's the way administrators are wired. In other words, to want that kind of order.
That's why we're good at what we do.
Yeah, that's why guys like me need people like you. I'd be a mess. But then I think that's probably incredibly challenging then. Is that what you're saying, the messy pieces of that?
It's part of the dynamic tension.
Is that in my notes? I gotta write that down. That's good.
We talked about the challenge of being delegators, because it's usually you can get it done better, faster,
Yeah.
and the way you want it.
Yeah.
But if you
Do I hear
delegate,
any amens?
you're sort of, you can be stuck with what you get.
Yeah.
So that's the challenge for, I think, the type of work that we do.
I think for me personally, we just had I work for Mennonite Central Committee. We just had a retreat, and remembering that my gifts are best used in the office, because hearing everyone who's on the front lines in Africa or even in Kitchener or wherever, and all the exciting things they're doing and all the hope and transformation that's happening in all of MCC's work, and thinking, oh man, I wish I could go there, or I wish I could do a term. My husband happens to be a dairy farmer too, so we won't be going to but just remembering that, you know, in order for them to do all that stuff, I need to be able to do my admin work, and remembering that even though that sounds really tempting, I know that my gifts are being used in the best way, right, for me personally. So just being reminded of that and getting inspired again by, oh yeah, all this is happening because I'm getting that signature or whatever.
I think the other thing is flexibility. You know, all it takes is a phone call or somebody stopping in the office to change your complete path of what you thought you were going to do that day, because this is really important and they need it for tonight. And yeah.
And patience.
Yes.
Well, good, thank you for sharing that. We're going to now begin the, quite honestly, the most vulnerable piece that I want you to do. How many bulletins do we have at each table? Recognizing we don't all come from churches. I said this is the most vulnerable part of the morning, and this is why I put it towards the end of my time with you, just so that you wouldn't leave. No, so that I heard after chuckling over here. You get to stay. Now, I recognize that putting your work out in front of other people is what you do on every week. And I also recognize likely that doing it with your colleagues, in fact, I heard someone, I won't say who it was, but I heard, oh, I hope this one doesn't have any typos. So you want to talk to Susan about that? I'm willing to say that, Susan, because they're all thinking the same thing. So what I want you to do is you're going to pass your own bulletin to the person beside you. You don't get to you figure that out at your table. You can pass it across the table if you like. As long as you're not looking at your phone. And here's the task I have for you. You're looking at this bulletin now for the first time. I'm already noticing that some of you are explaining the bulletin to the person beside you. Just so you know, that's not a good sign. I hope you know that God has a sense of humor, and laughter is a good thing. Listen, what I'm wanting you to do as the new eyes to this bulletin, I'm wanting you to be the outsider. Bulletins are typically created for insiders. In other words, for those people who show up regularly on this thing. It's not created for the people that you're reaching out to. Typically not. That's where it's focused. I want you to look at this from a Missio Dei perspective. If the woman at the well showed up in your church, you're not even going out to her, but if she shows up in your church and she sees this bulletin, what is she going to understand and what is she not going to understand? Okay? And then I'm going to give you 10 minutes to then just go through that and begin to have the conversation around the table. Does that make sense? All right? I just want to walk you through just a couple of the pieces that we're not going to get to, and I knew we weren't going to get to, but I wanted them to be in your hands. Depending on the relationship you have with your colleagues back in your workplace, there are some exercises here that I would encourage you to say, well, here's what I'm bringing from the Administrators Day that MCEC hosted. And I think this looks interesting. Let's have this conversation. I think the instructions are fairly straightforward, so even if you as a staff could do the Imagine Your Church, I think you would, I'm saying it would be, at the very least, interesting. I suspect also helpful. Another resource that you've got is making volunteering and volunteers a priority. I think in regards to Missio Dei, just as guys like me function so much better with an administrator who gets what I do and try to do. And I was pleased. I'm sorry, Ms. MCC, Lori.
Yeah.
I was pleased to hear your comments. Just recognizing again, I've got an important role to play here. Well, I suspect for all of you, volunteers just play an incredibly important role. And Missio Dei isn't going to happen without your volunteers understanding what it is that you do and what it is that the church is trying to do and what Missio Dei and Missional Church is. So that you can take home with you. The reaching your community. This is the big fat tree killer that I insisted that you have. This comes out of Leadership Magazine. The website is on the bottom here. I don't use all of their stuff. I don't like all of their stuff. Be forewarned, it is American. It's not written for Mennonites. It's written for a more evangelical community than what many, not all, but what many Mennonite churches are in MCEC. But I think from my reading through this, there is an understanding and a practice of missional church. They don't use missional church language. They don't use Missio Dei language. But there are good case studies and stories in here. So again, to take this back to your office and say, I think it would be helpful for us as a staff. Sorry, you don't have to say that. Blame it on me. Brian's insisted that we bring this back to the office and we go through at least one of these case studies. And if you're just going to do one, I'd recommend the first one. That'll be the easiest for the people that you work with. His name is Myron Augsburger, and you can tell he's a Mennonite. Which he is. And finally, something that I invite you to post somewhere near your desk or at your desk is the Missio Day prayer guide. There are items here where you can pray for the church and as well you can pray for the neighborhood and community. By neighborhood, I mean what is in and around your church building. Okay? That's your neighborhood. Community can be that same thing. Community can also be referring to, because some of you have people who are not in the neighborhood that come to your church. Yes? A lot of the people aren't in your neighborhood that come to your church. Maybe the case. So community can exist wherever your parishioners are. Okay? So the people in your church, if your church is in Kitchener, but you've got somebody driving in from New Hamburg, well, they have their community out there. And so that's also part of your church, even though it's not your neighborhood. And I would encourage you to take one line for each workday. And if you forget one day, that's fine. But as leaders, as Missio Day leaders, as followers of Christ, as people who are trying to be more Christ-like, for you to recognize that an incredibly important part of your job, even if it is not in your job description, is prayer. For you to be praying for your church and the people in your church is, if you aren't doing that, I'm just saying you're missing an important part of what I believe administrators can be about. Your prayers will be so much more organized than mine. You'll actually get through this list, where guys like me, I'm all over the place. I'm out of time. I want to thank you so much for your attention. You're a fun group to work with. Imagine that, administrators are Thank you so much.